Hello, and welcome to another edition of TMS TV. I'm here with Angus McIntyre. We're talking about money. Can I ask, what was the hourly rate when you first started?
It was $3.70 an hour, but they had a graduated payment at that time. So the minimum wage was $1.50 an hour when I started, maybe $1.75 an hour. So, and I was doing cleaning work. I was doing other work for that kind of payment. But when the value of the money at that time, you know, at $3.70 an hour, a driver could save up and buy a house in the city. So even though it seems low compared to what we have now, inflation hadn't started much. When we sold the tokens, the adult tokens were 4 for 75 cents. And the fare was 20 cents for adults. So you actually saved a nickel, but a nickel was half the price of a cup of coffee. You could still buy a coffee for a dime. So when I tell people that, you have to explain, oh, gee, you only saved a nickel, but actually a nickel was worth something, right? And student tokens were 10 for $1, but only during school hours. And Churburn had these plastic blue chips here. We call them poker chips. And those were 4 for 30 cents, I think. So when you were handling the money, you were dealing with all this all the time. An example of the passengers taking advantage of this occurred one day at Woodward's, eastbound Hastings and Abbott, which was probably the busiest stop downtown, particularly on $1.49 day. And this guy got on with a $5 bill, which at that time, that was a lot of money. You never saw a 10. Like, everybody was dealing with 2s and 1s and 5s. And he wanted change. And I said, don't you have anything smaller? And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a handful of dimes and nickels and quarters that he could have used 2 dimes to pay the fare. And he took the quarter out of all of these other coins and put it in a dish, asking for change. And you bit your tongue and made change. At the end, we were actually, for people that were not pleasant, there were people back then, change, they got on, they were nasty. When you gave them the change, instead of a nickel, you'd give them 5 pennies. And and we didn't deal in pennies, right? But you give them 5 pennies. This was a risk, because the one thing that happened, because we now were fingerprinted by the police, like we were actually taken in training down to the police station and fingerprinted as part of the security to check to see if we had any record and that sort of thing, because we were handling the company's money. So a spotter could be on the bus at any time and observe how you handled the money, how you made change and everything else. And we never knew who they were because they were incognito. They could write you up for saying things to the passengers that weren't appropriate, this sort of thing. So it really didn't change the way we operated because we never knew who they were, so we just did what we wanted anyway.
So you mentioned that you didn't wear high-vis vests. Was there any other things that you did that we would maybe frown upon now?
Well, the thing that we had to do in training, all 6 of us, regardless of age, in the Oak Ridge yard, was they took a Brill trolley and they took the retriever rope out of the back of the retriever on the back and let the trolley pole go straight up in the air. And on the side of the Brill trolleys, beside the back doors, there are 4 fold-out steps that fold out, that provide a way to climb up onto the roof. And then there's handholds and a non-slip area up on the roof where the base for the trolley poles are. So what we had to do was that they would let the pole straight up in the air out of the retriever. And then you had to open the steps one at a time as you climbed up, climb up onto the roof adjacent to 600 volts DC wires that you were near, but you were cautioned not to touch, right, for obvious reasons, although the vehicle was on rubber tires, so there was some, if you held both at the same time, you were in trouble. But if you just each wire one at a time, you wouldn't get electrocuted, so they said. So, what you then had to do was take that trolley pole and put your hands and walk it down. So there's a fairly strong strain pushing it up, and that spring is trying to push it up. But then you can use your body weight and you walk down the length of the pole and hook it underneath the pole hook up on the roof at the rear of the trolley. So once it's hooked under there, you then go back and you climb back down the side of the bus. And as you climb down, you fold in the steps so that they're not left sticking out. And then you go back to the retriever and you put the rope back into the retriever so that once it's back in the retriever, there's a pin or a key that's holding it in place. Then the retriever is released. And then, if need be, you rewind it, which is something that would happen if it tripped when the poles came off. One of the reasons they did this was because a situation could arise where a tractor trailer would hit the retriever rope and break it. Or you'd lose your trolley pole, and even though the ropes were very strong, the rope would break. It was an older rope. So that was one reason you'd have to climb up on the roof, is because the rope is broken and it's up there and you walk it down and you could tie the two ropes together. Another situation that would require you getting up on the roof, perhaps, usually not, the retriever would jam and the rope would not come out. So you've lost the trolley poles, the rope wouldn't come out, and it's jammed. And no matter how hard you try, the rope would only go in, it would not come out again. So what you did in that case is you cut the rope with a knife. And then the rope would go winding back out in the retriever with this big ratcheting noise. And then you could tie the two ropes together, remaining, to one rope, and put both poles up on the two different wires with the one rope by leaving some slack. People were always amazed when you could do that, right? So, so the retrievers were pretty good for most of the times when the trolley poles came off. But there were situations where sometimes we would have to push a trolley with another trolley or a bus, with wheel blocks on the bumpers to push you to get to where the overhead was. Where we had parades and detours for certain events, where Hastings and Commercial, where there was no trolley wires for the detour, we'd have 3 or 4 extra men drivers riding the back bumpers and coasting across the intersection. The supervisor was there to do this with people on the buses and so on. And then you get to the far side and put the poles back up. So we were doing things that now even the mechanics don't do when they deal with the trolley buses. Now have batteries and you have much more flexibility with doing things. But there was a lot more expectation when I started and training to keep the service going. And we were responsible for 12-volt fuses in the fuse panel on the Bureau trolleys. If the headlights weren't working, you were responsible for replacing the fuse. The motor generator set, if it failed, if that was a fuse, it turned signals. You had to change the fuses in service. That's not a risk because there was no 600 volts there. It was just small 12-volt fuses. And again, you could be in places where you were distant and there was no road supervisor, and you're up on the roof, and hopefully it wasn't winter or rainy or cold, but you were in a situation where often another driver would stop and help you, like you're in trouble and they'd come to help you. So that was another part of it, was the camaraderie and the assistance when we didn't have a support of radios and supervisors and so on. Um, it was a more of a do-it-yourself kind of thing, and we were trained for that.